A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Looking for some deeper insights today into the Israel-Hamas and regional Middle Eastern war. Insights I don't think you'll hear anywhere else. And as Christians, we're interested not only in the geopolitical developments around the conflict, but in the civilizational dimensions where Judeo-Christian foundations of the West are in conflict with anti-Western forces like Iran. And we're interested in the theological and even eschatological, the end times types of dimensions, and around that Judeo-Christian biblical theology, and then contrasted, I guess, with what might be Islamic theology, might be fueling some of the conflict. Well, our special guest today, Dr. Kameel Majdali, says the conflict is much more theological than political. And you might even remember in Israel, 7th of October 2023, the foundation start of what was this stage of that conflict. When Hamas launched a surprise attack against Israel, Hamas fighters slaughtered 1,200 Jewish men, women and children. They took 251 hostages, and the war continues because Hamas refuses to release the remaining 58 hostages being held in Gaza. So back with one of our favourite commentators, author, Bible teacher, futurist, Dr. Kameel Majdali, who leads Teach All Nations, joining us from the UK. Kameel, welcome back to 2020.
Hello, Neil, and hello, Australia. Good to be back.
Hey, thanks for staying up late. It's very early in the morning where you are in the UK. Hey, let me start, Kameel, with the thought, as I say in our introduction, that the conflict that's going on in the Middle East might be much more theological than political. How do you describe the way things have continued to bubble along, even way, way beyond the most recent outburst?
Well, I think theology is all important in this conflict. Remember, this is the birthplace of the Christian faith. Of course, the birthplace of Judaism, the older sister, and the birthplace of Islam, monotheism. It's the most religious place on earth, and as I often say, if religion could give you peace, the Middle East would be the most peaceful place on earth. But as we know, it's not. Theology is very important, but also I take note you have, Neil, really read my article well. But it's a spiritual dimension which is in tandem with theology. Theology is, let me put it this way, most Western diplomats couldn't imagine that a conflict would be based on theology. They look at it strictly from a secular point of view. But the secular point of view doesn't explain so many of the quirky things that happen in the Middle East. And so theology, basically you've got Christian eschatology or Judeo-Christian eschatology, and then you've got Islamic eschatology, which in some ways has parallel streams, but the cast of characters is different. The outcome is different. And it's almost like a race to see whose God is the God that dominates overall. So we have a situation that the Jews are in the land again after 2,000 years of exile versus supremacist or supersessionist theology in Islam, which basically says we are the heirs of the Jews and the Christians, and now we have the final prophet, the final revelation, the final victory. This is a conflict of a great proportion. Much of Islamic Christian history, of course, there's been coexistence and what have you, but ultimately the spiritual forces team up with theology, to, especially in these last days, and the conflict is very palpable. You can often feel it when you go to the Middle East.
As you say, Kameel, there's a conflict that has dated way, way back further than anyone can technically imagine, especially if you take a secularist idea and think that the whole issue started on October 7th, 2023. You say that was not the start of the war, but this continuation of a conflict. But when we think, this conflict dating back decades, dating back centuries, dating back millennia, dating back into biblical times, that sometimes is hard to ascertain. How do you describe how far this conflict goes back that might yet be still unresolved?
Well, if you go back to Jacob and Esau, as far as we can tell. Well, what I didn't yet mention is that for much of, say, Islamic history, remember, they had an empire that was the biggest in history, apart from the Mongols, who usually had a slightly bigger empire. But it went on for centuries. And yes, Jewish and Muslim relations were okay during that time. But that's because the Islamic rulers were in charge. But all of a sudden, after 1,300 years, the Jews are back again in Palestine, and they're running the country. And so for the first time in Islamic history, you have Jews ruling over Muslims. So that was something they just weren't accustomed to, let alone other aspects of theology. So they can get along. I've seen it. They can get along pretty well. But when it comes to who's the boss, that's another story. And that's part of what we dealt with. So as far as when it all began, it began with probably Cain and Abel in some ways. But all I'm going to say is that what we saw on the 7th of October was the breaking of a ceasefire, not the starting of a new conflict.
Now, let's talk. You mentioned, while we're talking theological perspectives, which, of course, mainstream secular media doesn't deal with, and you say they'd be very surprised to even think that there could be something theological in this. You also mentioned spiritual, but you didn't use that in the same context as the theological. Is there a dimension here that we might understand, recognizing the presence of God, supernatural power, the way that he works the events of history? Explain to us what you think about the spiritual dimension that's going on in the Middle East.
Well, I wouldn't have said this comment that I'm about to say years ago, but it seems to be that the reconstitution of the Jewish state in Palestine has all the marks of divine intervention. I did a thesis at a master's level on Jerusalem 1948, how the Holy City ended up being divided between Israel and Jordan after the war. They call it the War of Independence in Israel. 1948 war for everyone else. So all I know is when I did that thesis, I was amazed at basically, I can't help but call it miracles that happened in that war, because the Jewish state only had 600,000 residents, and they were poorly armed, and they were facing 5 Arab armies that were well armed. Well, some of them were, like the Jordanian Arab Legion. And yet, and they just came out of a Holocaust 3 years earlier, and yet they survived and thrived. And it's not to say God plays favorites and he doesn't love the Arabs. He definitely does. I can testify to that firsthand. But divine intervention with the 6-Day War, the same all the way up to now. Or even during this conflict when Iran attacked Israel twice, biggest barrage of missiles ever in history up till now. Hardly anyone got touched. Nobody was killed, as far as I know. What does this all mean? It means that God is aware, he is active, he's working his purposes. Plus, there's a lot of praying people, too. So it's not that I want to play the politics thing. I don't. But the spiritual forces are at work. And I can tell you, if God's at work, and he is, the devil and his demons are also at work too. And so there's a lot of spiritual dimension that goes unnoticed, even by Christians in that part of the world.
So not a surprise when secular media or secular political commentary doesn't recognise miraculous deliverance for the state of Israel. And that's what you're talking about there. And, you might say, well, isn't that just clever? They've got an iron dome and they were able to defuse the attack that came from that huge onslaught, that 500 missile and drone attack from Iran. They were able to defuse that, and as you say, virtually no one was hurt. I think, from memory, there was an injury of a young girl at one of the Israeli airports. But the miraculous deliverance, from the Christian point of view, looking at the things in the Middle East, sometimes we like to just look at prophetic ways that you might look to see some levels of fulfillment. Where do you contextualize seeing miracles like that, diffusing that whole attack? Where do you contextualize that in understanding whether that's actually an end times thing or whether it's just God preserving his people?
Good question, Neil. Preliminary answer is sometimes it may be clear it's a fulfillment of prophecy. Other times it might be. And if it's a might be, then we must wait and see, not rush to rash conclusions, but or sensationalism or alarmism, which often is the case. Just wait and see. But the role of intercession is undeniable. Same in the American political situation, a lot of intercession for years. I'm allowed to know because I've been part of the intercession, wanting to see the redemption in America, as well as in Australia. So, yeah, as far as end-time scenario, all I come up with at the moment is Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus says, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. These things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And so it's a sign with the wars and rumors of wars that are going on. And we've had a lot of that over the last 3 or 4 years. Then it's part of the Matthew 24 scenario, but there's more to it than that.
Vision.
Good to have you along with us, and our talkback line open on 1800 316 316, and you can send us a text on 0447 488 316. Our special guest, Dr. Kameel Majdali, who has stayed up very late. In fact, it's very early in the morning in the UK, just north of London, where we're speaking to him today. Kameel leads Teach All Nations, and there is a website, tan.org.au. Kameel, let me ask you about Trump and his visit to the Middle East. And he didn't visit Israel, but there was a number of stops along the way around Middle Eastern nations. Have you got some insight around the sorts of things that were happening while he was visiting?
Well, first of all, I note that he had a right royal welcome wherever he went. It's only 3 countries: Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. But he was almost treated like a rock star when he arrived. And Arabs are known for their hospitality. That's ingrained in the culture. But with the hospitality he received was amazing. Contrast that to the previous administration, where the best he got was a fist bump with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. It's an amazing contrast. But I saw in this visit a couple of things. First of all, he was the deal maker. Now, people have to remember, Trump wrote a best-selling book called The Art of the Deal. And it was paying off rich dividends. He amassed over $2 trillion of investment in the U.S., bringing jobs and other things back to America that had been outsourced overseas. And, of course, that's a great achievement. But in addition to being a deal maker, he was a peacemaker. He even reached out to the Houthis. Well, not reached out, but he came to a agreement with the Houthis of Yemen, who've been very successful at getting past Israeli airspace and sending their drone missiles, their drones or their missiles, I should say, their missiles actually, into Israel, causing Israelis to scurry into their bomb shelters more than once, and even getting near the perimeter of the Ben Gurion airport in Tel Aviv. He reached an agreement with them, the Houthis. He reached out to the interim president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, and he even offered an olive branch to Iran. There was actually, in that sense, something for everyone in this particular thing. So his wishes for Iran, I thought, were amazing. He says, I want to see Iran prosper. I just don't want to see them have a nuclear bomb. So while he's among friends, like in Qatar and UAE and Saudi Arabia, he even reached out to the enemies too. But at the same time, there's controversy because of the plane that Qatar is giving, not to Trump directly, to the Department of Defense of the United States. And also, Qatar is an interesting one because they have tons of money, plenty of money to burn, and they've invested in U.S. universities. They've invested in Hamas. They're a great supporter of Hamas. In fact, Hamas billionaire exiles had been resident in Doha. So that's the Middle East. It's never straightforward. It's never just black and white. Lots of shades of gray. But Trump's visit, they call it historic, and I have to say it probably was historic, but time will tell what kind of good fruits that has.
Interesting, isn't it, that Donald Trump, in his latest budget, has set aside money for a dome, something similar to the Israel Iron Dome. I think they're calling it the Golden Dome for the US. But in anticipation of what you might say, likely conflict between nations, and that way a defence mechanism for the US, and making friends in the Middle East. And as you say, he's made friends with a number of Arab nations. But Iran is the one that has rejected any sort of friendship offer or any sort of peace negotiation there. Where do you see Iran in the mix? And if we're taking dimensions like not only a geopolitical thought, but also if you're taking into consideration those sorts of biblical images that we have of prophecy fulfillment and times and scenarios, where do you think that is appearing to be if we're looking at Iran at this time?
Well, Iran is a very important country in many ways, one that's little understood and certainly reviled in Western circles because of their theocratic, puritanical, fundamentalist government. But it is a very, very important country, geographically, influence-wise, so on. Not just Iran, China and other countries have changed the equation. Well, they haven't changed it all. The whole world has changed. For the United States, remember, geography was always a plus because it was far away from zones of conflict. America doesn't normally fight world wars on its own territory, surrounded by two big oceans and great strategic depth and so on. Well, that's changed because there's missiles that can now reach anybody, anywhere, seemingly. And if the missile cannot reach the country from your own country, like Iran to the United States, there's always submarines and ships that can deploy the missiles too. So Trump and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, have good reason to want to have this, I forgot the technical term, but like the Iron Dome, which has just been approved, the American version, because the geography is no longer an impediment to striking militarily. Iran is very, very crucial in this because it holds a balance of power in the Middle East. It is, even though it is a Shiite Muslim entity, nation, and most of the rest of the Middle East is Sunni. Bahrain may be another exception here too. So its influence is great. And it does have weaponry. How good the weaponry is, how good their missiles are. In theory, those missiles can reach Europe, at least, and of course all over Israel. So it's something to watch and pray about. But the Iranian leadership traditionally has been very pragmatic. Hard to believe that clerics can be so pragmatic, but I could tell stories, but probably not on the air, of some of the pragmatism of Iranian leadership over the last 46 years since the Islamic Republic has been founded. So it's something to watch and pray for. But remember, again, in Iran, it's not well understood or noted, but it's a fact. They've got a vibrant underground church that's growing by the day. In fact, it's estimated to be the largest or fastest growing national church in the world, happening in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So good talking about Iran, and let's not lose sight of that for a few moments. But I know that you like to keep the focus around the nation of Israel. And even when we're talking about Donald Trump and Americans and defending themselves and being a peacemaker and the issues around US involvement even in conflict there, Israel clearly sees Iran as the puppet master, the one who is sponsoring all of the conflict against Israel at this time. There would be those who might be thinking that Israel will likely respond militarily because of Iran getting close to having nuclear weapons. Any thoughts here from what you've been monitoring around the potential of what might be happening there around those nuclear weapons and maybe Israel's response?
Excellent question. In fact, it's the question of the hour. Iran, consensus-wise, is agreed to be the reason, or shall we say the cause, of the Hamas war with Israel, or at least the equipping and the emboldening and the financing of Hamas, as well as the Houthis, as well as Hezbollah in Lebanon. These are the proxies of Iran. So that is the general consensus, that Iran is behind everything that goes in the Middle East. And it's hard to argue otherwise, even though they like to step back. It's kind of like George Soros. You don't see him, you don't hear from him, but you know he's there, and his influence is still very great. Iran is, in that sense, the same. So Iran has this subject of Iran and nuclear weapons is, for me, an old subject. I've been dealing with it since the 90s. It only became common currency in the 21st century under the Bush administration. That Iran keeps saying, we want nuclear energy, we only want it for peaceful purposes. The problem with that statement is that Iran has 10% of the world's oil. Why on earth would they need a civilian nuclear program? And they also known for the doctrine of taqiyya, which means pious. I call it lying, but just not telling the truth in order to preserve the faith. Iran seems to be very good at that. So Israel has been sounding the alarm for many years about Iran having a nuclear capability. And I do not doubt their desire and determination, if they so have decided, that they're going to attack Iran no matter what. Very risky proposition, but Israel has been bombing Iran of late because of the Syrian war and getting away with it. And they took out some of their missile batteries, I think, not long ago. I can't remember the month. So Iran has not fared very well in direct conflict with Israel, but I say it's a very, very risky proposition. I know Donald Trump really doesn't want to bomb Iran. He doesn't want new wars. He's in the business. The deal maker wants to end wars, not see wars started. So he's really keen on negotiations because, again, he likes to make a deal with Iran. But it could just be that they're stringing him along, waiting for him to get out of office in 2029. Just like what North Korea did. North Korea strung the Americans along. It was under Bill Clinton about the same thing, nuclear technology. Lo and behold, a few years later, they had the bomb. And that's what we're concerned that Iran might do likewise.
Okay, we're taking calls on 1800 316 316. You can join in our conversation. Let's take a call. Sue is in Kingston in Tasmania. Hi, Sue. Welcome along.
Hello, Neil. Oh, thank you very much. You've had some wonderful guests on today already. And hello, Kameel. I just want to thank you for raising the issue of what's going on in the Middle East, because it can, I'm sure there are people out there like myself who feel absolutely sick at what's going on, knowing that Jesus has given us the truth of salvation and peace. And I've been reading a wonderful book by Brian Simmons and Gretchen Rodriguez. It's I Hear His Whisper. It's 365 daily meditations and declarations. And on the 16th of May, the heading is, I am God of the New. And it says, I am passing out fresh blueprints. It brings in the aspect that we're entering a new era. It's a spiritual era. And I cannot understand why, because the Jews were given a prophecy of a Messiah to come and rescue them, and the Muslims have been given a mandate to be obedient to Jesus as the Messiah and one of their prophets. Why the two conflicting parties can't be brought together somehow, particularly President Netanyahu, and given an understanding of the New Testament promises peace and salvation through Jesus Christ as their Lord and Saviour.
Let's get a thought here or two from Kameel around those things. Kameel, I hope you were able to hear what Sue was sharing there. What are your responses?
I could hear Sue, but I wasn't exactly clear what the question is. Is the question, why can't they reconcile around the person of Jesus? Is that what it was, Sue?
Yes, why can't there be someone that helps them to understand? Like a political leader, as Donald Trump's clearly trying to help bring about peace and prevent wars. But to help President Netanyahu give thought to Jesus as the Messiah and the way forward, and what he is doing in terms of this Old Testament bombardment of the enemy, and Hamas takes on board an understanding of Jesus as their prophet and Messiah, and do away with this Hamas mandate of 1988 to kill all Jews. Because until Jesus...
Yep, Sue, let's keep it there. Kameel, did you pick up the gist of that now?
I believe so. I can just say that as far as from a diplomatic point of view, they can't bring up religion or theology of any religion. They have to, of course, deal with the conflict at hand. Behind the scenes, I can say that people like Netanyahu has had a lot of Christian input and Christian contact. In fact, he is, as a shrewd politician, he's been very nice to Christians, especially American Christian leaders who are not fanatical but zealous supporters of Israel. But it's not just him. On the Arab side, too, it's the case. There is a book out called Once an Arafat Man by Tas Abu Sada, who was Arafat's chauffeur. And he talks about coming to faith in Christ, Abu Sada, seeing Arafat after many years of absence and giving him the gospel. on a personal level, there's been this outreach for people to hear the good news. But remember, in our prayers for the Middle East and our prayers for salvation, we have to ask for the veil to be lifted. There's a kind of blindness to the gospel of Jesus and the very region where he lived, died, and rose again. It's ironic. He's wildly popular, Jesus and the Christian church, all over the world. But in the place where he came from, it's kind of like Nazareth. The prophet is with honor everywhere except in your own home country. In his own home region it is. And so we need to pray that the veil is lifted and that the Son of God will shine brightly on that. But we believe it will happen. If nothing else, Romans 11:26, that all Israel shall be saved. It will happen. But it's not going to happen by us being passive about it and saying, well, it's in the Bible. It will happen by being active in prayer and in whatever engagement the Holy Spirit directs us to do.
Sue, in Kingston, Tasmania, thank you so much for some great insight there. Sparked a great response from Kameel. Sue, thanks for your call. We're just only a few minutes remaining for our conversation, Kameel. Hey, are you planning to come to Australia? I don't know, it must be just about the last decade or so. You've been doing a tour each year around the sort of August, September, October months. Are you planning another visit anytime soon?
I'm delaying my visit this time because we are in a project of digitizing all my Bible teaching over 20-some years and making it available by app. So that's taking up a lot of my time. So we're pushing the dates, which I kind of wanted to do for a few years anyway, from the end of the year to the beginning of the following year, say March or April 2026. So yes, we renamed the tour Your Early Warning Service, EWS, Y-E-W-S, Your Early Warning Service, because early warning saves lives and saves souls. Taking world events, even events in Australia, and seeing them from a biblical paradigm, and basically going behind the headlines to see not only what is happening, but why it's happening. So we plan to do that March, April of 2026.
All right, we'll look forward to a tour March, April next year. And you also lead tours to Holy Land and to other nations that are biblical foundations. You've got one coming up, a tour to Turkey about the Book of Revelation, the Book of Revelation tour. How does that one look?
Well, we just launched it, and it's in 6 months' time. Actually, it's now more close to 5 months' time from now. Book of Revelation includes the cities, the 7 churches were hosted back in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. It's a wonderful tour. I've done it a few times, and people really enjoy it. But I'm throwing in a bonus, and that is, weather permitting, we will go to the island of Patmos, where John received the book of Revelation in the first place. When I went to Patmos the first time, it was a very emotional thing for Leanne and I. Leanne almost cried, and I can count on one hand how many times I've seen Leanne cry. Almost cried when we went there and realized that this was the place where God visited an old man who thought his best days were behind him. And he gave him the most superlative vision of the world, which is the seal of prophecy, seal of the New Testament, seal of the Bible. It just was very moving. Then we go to Cappadocia, which has a rich Christian history and amazing geological formations like fairy chimneys and all that kind of thing, and underground cities where people hid from persecution when Christians were the majority in Turkey. And then I'm offering a bonus extension from Antioch to Ephesus in the footsteps of Paul. That's an extra 4 or 5 nights. So that's in October. That's in end of October, beginning of November of 2025.
And Israel tours, they're not so easy to coordinate right now, but you've got one in mind for early next year?
Yes. February 1st to 15th, 2026, we're offering the Victory Tour. And similar to the Freedom Tour of 2023, 2 years ago, similar itinerary. Basically, the main places, the coastal plain, Galilee and the Lake of Galilee, the Rift Valley, the Dead Sea, Caesarea on the coast, which is where we have Gentile Pentecost, and of course Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and Jericho is a bonus. And
listeners might want to keep an eye out for any of your books. You've written a dozen books or so, new one coming out every now and then. The latest one is called Welcome, Holy Spirit, Understanding the Book of Acts. And for listeners, you can get a hold of that via Koorong, and it's published through Ingram Spark, and you can get a hold of that through Koorong. Kameel, I'll point listeners to the Teach All Nations website for them to link with you, and they can subscribe to your newsletter. So tan.org.au, Teach All Nations, tan.org.au, to connect with Dr. Kameel Majdali, who leads Teach All Nations. And interestingly, Kameel, our daily program, Faith in the Future, is coming up next. And you're a part of our 2020 program every weekday, and really appreciate you, and I really appreciate the fact that we're talking to you live now. You've stayed up late. It's a very early morning in the UK. Really appreciate your insights as always, and thanks so much for being with us and sharing your heart with guests today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil, and God bless Australia.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.